All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we are doing something incredibly exciting. We're taking what is basically a chaotic, rapid-fire 25-minute barrage of essential chess theory and distilling it all down into one highly structured, highly actionable tactical briefing. Whether you're looking to refine your endgame or you just want to stop blundering your queen, we're cutting out the fluff and getting straight to the absolute core mechanics of the game. We're going to look at everything from pawn structure to devastating tactical strikes, pulling directly from the source material to give you exactly what you need to dominate the board.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover rules and etiquette, mastering your pawns, core attacking tactics, strategic board control, and finally, unstoppable checkmates. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Essential Rules and Etiquette. The ground rules of the battlefield. And hey, as you step into this professional arena, just remember the dress code, all right? It is European business casual and absolutely no hats. So let's talk about the flow of time and moves on the board, specifically the number 50. The 50 move rule basically states that if no pawn has been moved and no capture has been made for 50 moves straight, you can optionally claim a draw. The key word there is optional. You can keep playing if you both really want to, but if that stagnation stretches out to 75 moves without a single pawn push or a capture, well, the draw becomes completely forced for both sides. The game simply ends. Which kind of brings us to this core warrior philosophy. Resignation is something that you should never do. You never want to just voluntarily throw in the towel because things look a little grim, but there is a strategic exception to this mindset. If you're way down on the clock and your opponent mathematically has no possible way to checkmate you, say they literally only have a single king left, you don't have to just sit there and wait to lose on time. You can actively claim a draw to stop them from making random moves until your clock runs out. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 2, Mastering Your Pawns. Command your infantry. Look, pawns might be the smallest pieces on the board, but they literally dictate the entire flow and structure of the game. How you manage them is going to make or break your position. But keep in mind, not all passed pawns are created equal. At the absolute top of the hierarchy are connected passed pawns. They perfectly protect each other side by side as they march up the board. Next up are protected passed pawns, which are anchored by other pieces. And finally, you've got flank passed pawns, which are a bit harder to support, sure, but they are still incredibly useful in the endgame. The golden rule here? If you have a passed pawn that isn't blocked by enemy pieces, push it. That ugly little passed pawn can very quickly turn into a beautiful queen that just smashes your opponent. So a super crucial point is how you maneuver these little guys during captures. When you have a choice to take a piece with one of two pawns, you should almost always capture toward the center of the board. Why? Because capturing toward the center naturally builds stronger attacks, and crucially, it opens up files for your rooks to become super active. Oh, and a quick word of warning here. Avoid moving the pawns directly in front of your castled king unless you are absolutely provoked. Those pawns are your king's shield. You push them at the wrong time and your king is going to get crushed by enemy pieces. All right, keeping that momentum going. Section 3, Core Attacking Tactics. Unleashing the Heavy Artillery. We are shifting gears now from structure to direct, aggressive strikes. To succeed here, you have to keep shoving checks and threats down your opponent's throat so they literally have no time to breathe. But before you launch that massive assault, you need to remember the rule of +2. To make sure an attack against the enemy king actually works, you have to bring at least 2 more attacking pieces than your opponent has defending pieces. Think of Gotham Chess brilliantly sacrificing a bishop simply because he realized he had 4 attacking pieces compared to basically 0 defenders for black. When the math is that heavily in your favor, the attack is absolutely going to succeed. So how do you actually build up that numbers advantage? You're going to want to use a battery. And no, we definitely aren't talking about car batteries here. A chess battery is when you line up long-range pieces, like 2 rooks or a queen and a bishop, on the exact same file or diagonal to exert immense pressure. Pair this with what we call a fossil, or a discovered attack. This is where moving one piece suddenly uncovers a deadly hidden attack from another piece right behind it. Stringing these concepts together creates absolute chaos for your opponent. And honestly, no tactical breakdown is complete without the most notorious pawn capture in the game. And passant is not just a chess move, it is a way of life. It's a really special capture that catches opponents totally off guard when they try to push a pawn 2 squares past your advanced pawn. There's actually a legendary moment where a player named Bobby sacrificed an entire game just because he got the opportunity to play en passant, proving that sometimes, the psychological victory is worth way more than the checkmate.
Okay, let's zoom out to the broader strategy. Section 4, strategic board control, dominating the map. Because having killer tactics is one thing, but knowing exactly where your pieces fundamentally belong on the map, that's what separates average players from absolute master strategists. And this brilliantly illustrates the eternal debate: bishops versus knights. Which one is better? Well, it entirely depends on the board state. Bishops thrive in wide open positions where they can slice across the board and control squares from afar. But in closed, pawn-locked positions, they become totally useless, just staring at the back of their own pawns. Knights are the exact opposite. In open space, they move as slow as snails. But in a closed, lockdown board, they are absolutely lethal. They can hop right over blockades to reach squares no other piece can touch. Let's break down raw point values versus actual real-world board impact. A queen is worth 9 points, and 3 minor pieces are worth 9 points. But here's the thing: 3 coordinated minor pieces will very often beat a single queen because they just control more squares. Similarly, 2 minor pieces are generally superior to a rook and a pawn. And my absolute favorite scenario, a well-placed knight locked onto an enemy outpost, is often worth far, far more than a trapped rook just sitting uselessly in the corner. Context is everything. When you perfectly control the board like that, you can force your opponent into Zugzwang. Now, I know it sounds like an expensive German car, but Zugzwang is actually a terrifying endgame situation where absolutely any legal move your opponent plays will actively worsen their position and lose them the game. A great way to force this is by exploiting their weak color complex. If their dark-squared bishop gets smashed off the board and all their defensive pawns are locked on light squares, well, their dark squares become massively vulnerable to infiltration. And that brings us to the final phase. Section 5, unstoppable checkmate patterns. The final kill. You've set up your pawns, you've launched your batteries, you control the map, and now it is time to trap the enemy king in a mating net. The absolute most fundamental endgame sequence you have to master is the king and queen checkmate strategy. The logic is simple, but it takes precision. Step 1, use your queen to slowly box off the opponent's king, shrinking their available squares little by little. Step 2, when the box is as small as possible, walk your own king up the board for support. Step 3, deliver the checkmate. But wait, you must be incredibly careful here. If you shrink the box too much and the enemy king has no legal squares to move to, but is not actually in check, you've caused a stalemate, and your guaranteed win just turned into a super frustrating draw. So to avoid those heartbreaking stalemates, you really need to memorize these devastating historical checkmate patterns. First, we have the Bowden mate, where 2 bishops act like a giant pair of scissors slicing off the king's escape. Then there's the Morphy mate, which traps the king right in the corner with a rook and bishop. We also have the hilariously named blind swine mate, featuring 2 completely overpowered rooks coordinating on the 7th rank. And of course, the sneaky stallion, where the queen traps the king and the knight delivers the final blow. If you memorize these, you'll literally start seeing the matrix when you play. Ultimately, all of this theory leads to one major, final mindset shift. Are you going to play hope chess? Hope chess is making a move and just crossing your fingers, hoping your opponent doesn't see your obvious trap, or just hoping they magically screw up. You gotta stop doing that. To truly level up, you must always assume that your opponent will play the absolute best, most punishing move possible, and you have to plan your strategy around that. So the question is, are you ready to stop hoping and start calculating?